So here I am. It's Andy here from Tomlin Films, and I'm here with Phoebe Kuhn today. So could you just talk a bit more about yourself and what you do?
Yes, thank you. So I am a communications content specialist, strategist. I have my own agency and I have an online group training program, which Andy just graduated from last month, actually. So what I specialize in is really helping small to medium-sized businesses, brands with their brand positioning, with their content strategy, and really helping them to engage with their audiences, really looking at communications, which is creative advertising, and how we can craft really poignant, creative, impactful messages that help brands really connect with their audiences and actually change perceptions. So that's my specialty. I've been doing that for over 7 years, and I used to, before I had my own consulting agency, worked in big agencies over in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, it's a really exciting work that you're doing, and it's interesting that you got that experience as well. That's actually in those companies, those big companies and stuff, and working in those teams and stuff. What do you think has been like a big part of what have you learned the most? You think from working in teams in that environment that you've brought to where you are now today?
So it's interesting because when you're in an agency, like you get siloed into a very specific role, and it's very difficult to kind of branch out beyond the role that you're in. So if you want to learn more, you kind of need to sort of like take things into your own hands. So when I was working at Leo Burnett and at Be Video, for example, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of extra courses and doing a lot of extracurricular reading while I was there. So I probably learned the most from, I guess, like getting a mentor in my workplace and just kind of piggybacking off of whatever they were doing. And I really relied on my mentors to share things that they were working on with me. And I would go up to them either at lunchtime or after work and ask if I could sort of get them to run me through certain decks that they were working on. So generally speaking, like the most exciting work they reserve for the really, really senior people. So for example, there's always the opportunity to work on pitches. And so like in my career, I've pitched for Google, I've pitched for the Australian Defence Force, I've pitched for BMW, I've pitched for Mini Cooper. So when you're working on a pitch, you get some really exciting opportunities to work with people that you might not normally work with that aren't in your immediate team. And those are sort of when you get exposed to lots of really interesting like research insights, because obviously the agency is putting a lot of money behind it, and it's not just like a business as usual type of thing. So you get a lot of hands on deck, and that's where you can really learn a lot, which is exciting.
Yeah, that's true. What about when it comes to the media side and the advertising, and what's the difference between the two? If we could start with that.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess this is a really great question because a lot of people have a differing understanding and I guess a skewed understanding of what media is versus what marketing is and kind of how they work together. So generally speaking, media is about getting your marketing message, your creative work in front of eyeballs. So people that work in media actually work to buy media slots, whether that's out of home or whether it's a digital slot, for example. So people who are like media buyers will actually negotiate with people who own like the real estate. For example, like let's say you're negotiating for a billboard in Times Square. A media buyer will buy that billboard for you at a particular rate so that you as the brand will have exposure to people in Times Square, or you can buy digital media assets. So media is all about understanding the placement of your message. In terms of advertising and creative communications, that's actually creating the message itself, and it's understanding all of the research and the psychology behind the market, behind like behavioral economics, and understanding like what drives behavior, and then crafting the creative message based on psychology and insights. So when marketing and advertising agencies work with media, essentially what's happening is the best way that they can collaborate is that a marketing agency or an advertising agency will get the research insights because media will have the best data. So media are who tracks the data. Media are who are able to actually provide the best sort of insights in terms of conversions and tracking things like that. So for example, from a modern perspective, media is commonly understood as people who work in PPC, people who do like SEO, SEM, and those types of tracking. So like Google is a media company, right? They're not they're an actual media company. So when advertising agencies work with media agencies to get that kind of data, then they can actually provide really, really effective messaging because it's based on all of this research, right? So then they'll craft a more effective message, hand it over for really effective placement, and that's where you get like the best possible conversion. So usually, 40, 50 years ago, what used to happen was it was just like one agency that would do everything. And then for some reason they split. And now you kind of, the problem that brands have is that they have like up to 10 agencies, and you sort of have this like too many cooks in the kitchen problem.
Yeah. And there's those people as well that are talking about the strategy and versus the tools and that kind of thing. I guess the media, like you said, the media is like the platforms or the tools, like a billboard or whatever. And I think a lot of people nowadays are kind of jumping on bandwagons or jumping on things that are just the tools, and then they might be not focusing as much on the traditional advertising principles and things like that. And I think I've been learning more from Mark Ritson lately about those kind of things, and him talking about you need a fucking strategy, he says, and not you don't need to use all these tools. Focus on the tools so much. Is in actually focus on the strategy, and then how do those tools fit with the strategy instead of it being completely too many strategies and not one succinct one kind of thing.
It's really important that I think that brands consider both things. Like it's really, when it comes to, I guess, like small businesses, which would be who I primarily help, and probably a lot of your audience, people who are like maybe coaches or consultants or just like, small service-based businesses. Your understanding of media and your budget for that kind of thing would actually be the most applicable thing would be understanding probably Facebook and Instagram sponsored posts, and really understanding like what we call in the industry as channel strategy. So a basic understanding of media for small business owners would be, okay, which channels do I want to use to get my message out there? So if you're looking at like non-digital channels, that might be, your local community pinup notice board, right? Like it could be your co-working space, having flyers there. In terms of a digital strategy, understanding like which channels you want to use, it's starting out by understanding like who your customer is, and then asking, okay, like who are they? How do I get to know them intimately, and where do they spend their time? And then that's when you can decide which channel you want to invest in building your audience and like communicating with your audience and engaging with them, right? Because obviously if you have like an IT based business, you probably don't want to be investing in Instagram as a channel. So, thinking about like where your audience is basically a media strategic thinking, and then crafting your message based on your audience, and then, driving it into the appropriate channel would be the way that those two things would work together for you to create the most effective reach. So for example, like my clients don't really necessarily spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. Like I don't really have a lot of clients who are in still corporate roles or in 9 to 5. So I don't really spend any time on LinkedIn at all. I haven't in at least 2 years at least. So for me, like it's, and for anyone who's listening, who's thinking about like, where do I spend my time? You need to think about like, okay, where are my prospects? Where are my audience? And the people who really need my help the most, and then really doubling down on communicating to them where they are.
Yeah, it's definitely important about the market research and the country. It's almost about the customer. There's that idea of customer centricity as well, other than product centricity. Of those differences, you think it comes into that as well?
Yeah, it's not really applicable when it comes to thinking about channel strategy. Like that's kind of a different thing.
So would it not be relevant in that regard? Then what would it be? What would be another situation that would be relevant then?
Customer centricity versus product centricity.
Yeah.
Like if you were looking at product strategy and if you were delivering a product.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, but we're talking about service-based businesses, so it's probably not relevant at all.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So about the so we talked about what the difference is between media and advertising, and then I guess we were just talking a bit there about how they come together. I guess with the strategy, and then understanding your audience and that, and what tool that you use and stuff. So now, how about when it comes to your creative expression, and how do they kind of provide that support for your brand's creative expression?
So basically, like as I sort of just covered before, like media buy, right? So it's actually the creative communications agency, like it's the copywriter and the art director's job to provide the creative idea for the brand. So if you're a small business and you're not working with an agency and you're sort of doing that kind of thing in-house, then the best thing that you can do is probably read a couple of books on advertising and creative communications so that you can learn how to craft a really effective message for your audience. And that's what I would suggest.
And what about when it comes to like the ways of tracking your success and stuff like that, in terms of, you know, there's sometimes the vanity metrics, and then there's the stuff that's more important that actually matters and stuff. So could we talk about a bit about that then?
Yeah, awesome. So when it comes to metrics, obviously, you know, when people teach a lot of social media marketing and content marketing and things like that, it can be very difficult to track how effective individual posts are. A lot of the time, what you'll see is content that is highly engaging is not necessarily highly converting, and vice versa, content that's highly converting is not necessarily highly engaging. So what you need to be looking at is a couple of different things. So there's basically there's two ways that you can look at your content. The first is looking at short-term conversions, and the second is looking at long-term brand resonance. So basically the things that are going to be the pieces that you're going to be creating that are going to drive a high level of brand resonance and connection with your audience are actually things that you need to be looking at long term. So there is a way that you can track brand resonance long term, and if you Google track brand resonance, I think that there's a way that you can actually do that through Google Analytics and surveys. And then basically short term, you're going to be looking at your conversions, but you don't want to confuse the two. So your short term strategy and your long term strategy are actually different. So you need to have metrics set up for each, but you need to make sure that you're not confusing them. So the metric that you want to be using to track your engagement is actually your brand resonance. So looking at people's emotions and feelings towards the brand, and tracking how those emotions change based on the engaging content that you're putting out over time. But this is something that needs to be done over like a 12-month period minimum, for example, because brand resonance and emotions change over a long period of time. Whereas for conversions, you want to track that separately to your engagement content, and that's really straightforward, because if you're creating direct response content, then you're basically just looking at, okay, put this out, and then within, let's say, within a 24-hour to a 1-week time period, how many conversions have been created. And you can set up tagged links, for example, where you can see people's pathways in the user journey. So the best way that you can look at things would be let's say you have different streams, you have an email marketing stream, you might have paid ads as a stream, you can have organic things as a stream. Whatever links you're using, I would track the links separately. So don't use the same link. Use a tagged link for email, use a tag link for Instagram, use a tag link for Facebook, and that way you can see which traffic is actually coming in from each separate channel, and then you can see which ones are resulting in conversions.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Definitely do that. To look back on those tags, yeah.
Yeah.
What about when it comes to positioning your brand, and what do you think is the one thing that will make the difference and make you actually stand out when you position yourself?
So when it comes to brand positioning, I like to think that there are layers or levels to positioning. So what I always encourage people to do is, first I sort of explain that you generally have a niche, and then beyond that you have a next level niche, niche 2.0, niche within the niche, whatever you want to call it, right? And then beyond that, if you really want to go ham and really carve out a territory, then what I explain to people is that you want to create a third level where you're getting so specific that you're actually creating your own terrain here. So this is when you become the leader by default, because there's no one operating in what you're doing. So you're essentially creating this brand monopoly.
That's the blue ocean idea, is it? The blue ocean strategy.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So you basically want to look at how specific you can go, and then you kind of want to find an angle. So find a talking point that's an angle that becomes your talking point. So think about it if your business was a TED Talk, what would the angle be that would make what you're speaking about different to what everybody else is speaking about, that grabs attention, that positions you as the authority, as the leader, and as the expert in your field? And the more specific you can get with your talking points, the more people are going to notice you, because you don't just blend into the conversation that everybody else is having.
Yeah, so that's the brand. It's kind of the idea of differentiation as well, when it comes to that side of things.
Yeah.
And there's those other ideas that in branding as well of something that distinctiveness as well. Would you say that distinctiveness and differentiation have got their own differences?
So they're just synonyms. I use both of those words just synonymously. But yeah, basically what makes your brand distinct is a couple of different things. So there are 5 keys of distinction, which I teach my clients. And those 5 keys are essentially a combination of position, niche, your brand promise, your tangibles, and there's a couple of other things in there. But like, it's a combination of all these other things that really, when you're able to define them very clearly, then it's like you have all of these variables that actually makes you stand out because it's clearly defined. And when you start communicating in terms of those, like that very descriptive language, you'll see that everything starts to look a lot more rock solid. So I was actually on the phone with one of my clients yesterday morning, and we're sort of talking about how he can communicate through structure. So we're using like a Venn circle model to communicate like his brand pillars, his program pillars, and his program promise. And once we were able to define them and look at like his customer desires and their problems and get some really specific language, all of a sudden everything in general became a lot more tangible. So like once you start with like you sort of have to go out and come back in a few times, if that makes sense. You sort of have to go out and look at like what the problem is in the market, like what they really want, and then go back in and define the really specific things, and sort of come back out again and look at your business from a wider standpoint and go, oh, cool, now everything just feels a lot tighter. So yeah, you really have to start by looking at, a variety of things, like including even just company values, like brand values, right? And what we stand for, because again, that's also going to tighten the language, and it's going to make what you're talking about when you choose to talk so much more specific.
And when it comes to getting those foundations right and getting clear with all that stuff, it kind of gets back to those ideas that we were saying about, you don't want to waste time on doing things that are vanity metrics or other things that are wasting time. You want to focus in on those things that are more important. And some of those things is coming back to your foundations to make sure that it still makes sense and everything's still aligned, because you're changing, we're all growing and changing, aren't we? So, and obviously the market's always changing, so we're growing, we're changing. We've always got to keep assessing that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really passionately about this. Like, I feel like it's really important because I have a lot of friends who work in the PPC space, so they're digital marketers, and they teach, or they do done for you agency work where they help their clients generate leads through Facebook ads, and they use a lot of really flawed metrics in terms of the way that they're promising leads. So like, for example, I have a colleague who runs a digital marketing agency, and she will agree to, like, let's say a $7 cost per lead for a client, right? Which is great. That's super cheap if you're investing in ad spend, depending on your industry. But what she counts as a lead is just someone who has opted in to, like an opt-in, right? So like opted into a webinar or a lead magnet, and they've just given their email address. But then when it comes time, you'll find that a lot of businesses will call those people, or they'll email those people, and they'll get those details, and then the person will never pick up the phone. So they're not really a warm lead. So like, you have a lot of PPC marketers who are counting like traffic and they're counting leads, but they're actually counting things that aren't really like that. It's like fake traffic, or they're like really cold leads that would never actually convert, right? So like, what I teach is basically a really, really warm funnel strategy, which is totally organic. And I teach people how to create really, really resonating content that actually generates real leads, right? So the way that I count a real lead is not by someone who's opted in. I count a real lead by someone who has messaged you and said, I'm interested, or I'd like to know more information. So they've actually reached out to you. That's how I track a lead. Like, that is a warm lead that has a high percent of conversion, 60-70%, as opposed to like someone who's just like filled something in because they've been targeted and they've likely forgotten about it within 24 hours, right? So they're never going to open like the follow-up emails. You call them, they're probably not going to pick up. Your conversion rate for that type of thing is going to be like less than 7%, probably most of the time. So yeah, I think it's just really important to kind of be aware of when you're working with digital marketers who don't actually have the creative understanding of, or this like the psychology and the behavioral understanding of what drives behavior, but they're just sort of like, they have the technical understanding of how to create the funnels, but they're not actually good copywriters, or they're not actually building processes in at the top to warm people. And so they're sort of like selling you this idea of like, I'm going to get you 100 leads, but really they might get you like 10 warm leads properly. So I think, in terms of vanity metrics, like that's really important to note as well. Like, when you're thinking about who to potentially hire and what they're able to deliver you.
Right. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely a good distinction to know, because obviously how they're measuring things depends on how they've decided. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense
Yeah, they
measuring that
decide
way.
on their own. Yeah, and I've
Yeah.
had so many friends who've been burnt by like Facebook ad strategists and digital marketers because they've invested like 10K in a funnel that hasn't provided them any kind of results. And, you know, then they have this like really bitter feeling where they're like, Facebook ads don't work. And it's like, ads do work. It's just that you haven't done it right because you've hired someone who's using Vanity Metrics and they've just like sold you on like probably like 40% of an overall strategy that needs to be implemented. So what I kind of teach is like you need to master the organic content first and then grow your audience. And once you've done those two things, then you can actually invest in ads. But there are certain foundational things you need to do before you're actually ready to start investing in a paid ad strategy. So, you know, in terms of like the foundational like aspect of the question that you just asked, basically like the brand positioning, you know, the behavioral stuff and the actual quality of the content, those are all really foundational. And if you don't have your brand position, if you don't have quality content, if you're not building your audience, if you don't do those things first, no paid ad strategy is going to work for you. Like you're going to spend a lot of money and going to have a really low conversion rate. So those are the three things you really need to master first to be able to like kind of, you know, work in the digital age and then scale. So, you know, those three things have been around for a really long time. Like that's what's timeless about advertising. You know, brand positioning has been around for hundreds of years, or at least 100. And so, yeah.
And when it comes to those vanity metrics and stuff, and people having these ideas in the mind of what success is and what it looks good like and all that sort of stuff, sometimes people will get an award, but maybe that award's been based on this vanity metric or this success in a different way, or things. Sometimes that can happen, and I think it's often because of people playing finite games. And with Simon Sinek, he talked about the infinite game of like you're playing to keep the game in play. You're not playing the game to win, because you never do win in business. It's like it's always an infinite game. It's like that's why an entrepreneur is thinking about long term and thinking about how can I make the world better and continue to do that, and then be in the process of it and enjoy the process. It's not about just this end result, big bang result. I've got an award and there we are. I've finished now. I can just die. It's like we want to keep going and keep growing. You're not living if you're not growing and continuously staying curious and looking what's going on and improving yourself.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. So, yeah, good note.
Yeah, and I think so. What about when it comes to the future of advertising and the trends of 2020?
So I think that, you know, with everything that's happening right now, we're at a really interesting time where I was actually just reading before that a lot of the major CEOs of corporations have actually stepped down over the last 6 weeks of companies. So have you heard about this?
No, I've not heard about it.
Yeah, so like a lot of people probably haven't heard this yet, but so you heard it here first, people. This is crazy. I'm going to share more on this later, but the CEO of Disney, the Match Group, so like everyone that owns like Tinder, Hinge, OkCupid, CEO of Hulu, Victoria's Secret, Salesforce, IBM, Harley Davidson, LinkedIn, MasterCard, and Bill Gates stepping down from the board of Microsoft. All of them have stepped down in the last 6 weeks. So it's really interesting, like depending on, I don't know how spiritual your audience is, but if you look at like what's going on astrologically, a lot of my colleagues who I guess like operate in that space and specialize in that kind of stuff predicted the constriction that was actually starting in December. It started in December, the constriction, and it was really going to peak in March, and then I think it was going to taper off by June. So like this was in the stars, and what's happening is like we're seeing what constriction does is it makes way for new birth, right? Like it makes way for like a new wave. So like a lot of the deaths that we're seeing, we're also seeing the equivalent in the business world of people stepping down, like the old, you know, basically we're entering into a new business paradigm, a new marketing paradigm, and we're seeing a lot of like the older people leave like by choice. Right? So like nature will aggrandize and like make the conditions really harsh. So like including for business, but then people will basically start to choose to leave and step down, right? So what we're seeing now is a new opportunity for like kind of the leaders of tomorrow to start rising. So it's really interesting if you look at the generations who are affected and the ones who aren't. People who are in this millennial generation are actually being called to kind of rise up and come in to lead the new paradigm and lead the way forward to a lot of, what's happening next. So I think the next 3 months for business and marketing will be really, really interesting as we start to see a change in the way things have been done structurally for probably the last like 30, 50 years to the way that things are going to be done moving forward, because we have a new set of people who are like leading and making decisions and a new set of voices, which is really interesting. I've definitely started to see that, like people more our age start to come into power over the last couple months and really have like strong voices. And I think that that's been warming up for a few years with the rise of social media, but that's now kind of, it's being cemented. So I think we're going to start to see a lot of younger management and upper management in corporations, which will be really interesting. So in terms of like trends for the rest of the year, I think that we're going to have a lot of really fresh voices. I think that there's going to be a whole new set of people in leadership positions. And I think that the way that we've done things for the last 30, 50 years is going to die very soon. So I think that now is the time more than ever to be re-looking at your business strategy and your marketing strategy. A couple of my like 8-figure mentors who I follow have been saying the same thing in their private groups, and just sort of talking about how now is really the time where everything that you've done before is no longer going to work, like everything down to copy, and everything just needs to be relooked, because everyone's message is no longer applicable. So it's like now we actually need to kind of hit the refresh button on everything. And, basically it's like adapt or die. If you don't look at things again now, you're going to become extinct.
Yeah, so there's that new intensity that's coming around, obviously, with where we are now with the coronavirus and all the other things that are going on. So, I mean, it's making people pay attention and think about and reassess and all that kind of thing. And all industries are changing right now. Every industry has been affected pretty much. I mean, every industry's got people involved, so it's inevitable for that to happen. But but at the same time, it's an opportunity again. So it's sort of in that everybody's, looking up, what can I do? What opportunity how can I use this opportunity in a way that's productive and keeps the entrepreneurial spirit going and stuff like that. So I think it's exciting times at the same time as, intense and whatnot. But so thanks a lot for joining me today. And I think you've got some online trainings coming up. Is that right?
Yeah, so for anyone who's interested in learning more, we actually have, we're hosting a free 2-day masterclass series next week. So that's going to be on Monday and Wednesday. So I'm going to pop the link in the comments for anyone who wants to join us and learn more. Basically, the 2 things that we'll be covering are how to craft the perfect one-liner. So a couple of months ago, I actually figured out how to really pitch yourself, no matter like who you are and what you do. You could be like the salesperson in an organization, or it could be like your company, right? But there's like a 3-step framework that actually takes the way that you talk about what you do. So instead of just saying like, I'm an accountant, apply this framework. And what it does is anyone that you tell them what you do in this way, they either become a raving fan who will refer you people who they think need your help, or they will just like sign up and say like, oh my God, I need that. Where do I sign? Where do I join? So I started testing this a couple of weeks ago. And every time I literally used this framework and told someone what I did, I either like got an introduction to someone, or I had someone say, where do I sign? And like, can you tell me when you're running this thing next? It was mind blowing. It was so effective. So that's going to be the first training. That's going to be next Monday. And the second training next Wednesday is on the 3 phases of connection, and actually how you can sort of create this funnel that I mentioned earlier in the interview, so that you're lining people up to sort of meet them where they are, so that you get this really streamless customer buyer journey, and how you can actually create content throughout those different levels of the funnel, so that you're not losing them at the top, right? Because the mistake that people make, especially when they're doing like paid ad strategies, and I get asked this question a lot, like, why don't ads work for me? Is because people aren't going through this warming process. They're just going and expecting people to buy straight away. And it's like, that's just not how it works. Like, you wouldn't ask someone a date and expect them to just like go home with you straight away. Like people need to be courted. So the second video, the second class is going to be on this process, which is going to be amazing for anyone who is ready to, invest in paid ads, or anyone who's asked that question before, like, why doesn't it work? How do I make it work? So if you'd like to join us, then just register via the link in the comments, and I hope to see you guys next week.
Great. Yeah, awesome. And
how about Andy?
Yeah, that's been good. So yeah. How about is there anything else you want to talk about before we go as well?
Yeah, so that's the classes are to promote the launch of my program, the Content Emporium, which is an 8-week group training program. So as I mentioned earlier, Andy graduated from our program last month, and I mean, yeah, how did you find it?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was really good, really inspiring, and very creative as well, and also strategic and practical as well at the same time. Good balance between the two. And some of the things that, before I actually came into it as well, having your initial session, the reading session as well, was really useful for me to then come into that and have that context, because I kind of realized after that there was a change to happen, and which you helped me to figure out. And then going in with that new perception and correlation or whatever was a really useful thing. And then also sort of the way that you talk about how to talk to an audience from the right way, that then inspires them to to improve themselves and buy your services or your products. And you see it, you set it up in a certain way that's a storytelling structure. And that was the thing that stuck in my mind the most, was the structure of the storytelling. So I think if you wanted to join the Content Emporium, then that's something that you're interested in, then that's a good reason to join, because how to learn more about storytelling in a business context as well, not just storytelling for engagement, but also for business as well. So that then having that perfect framework I say, was the thing that I took away the most from it.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, if anyone wants to join and check it out, then I'll drop the sales page in the comments as well. We are actually doing an early bird special at the moment. So if you sign up by Friday end of day, then you get $200 off the enrollment price. But otherwise, if you want to learn a little bit more about it, then you can join us next week in our free masterclasses, and join my free group as well for some for some questions, Q&A, and I'm available in there to chat to anyone who's interested in learning more. So yeah, I'll drop those comments, I'll drop those links in the comments, and hopefully, looking forward to meeting some of you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks again for joining me, Phoebe.
Thank you. Ciao.
Yep. This has been Andy from Tom Films. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you soon.